Most women would have walked away the day he looked her in the eye and said, "You're not my real mom, so stop pretending." But she didn't. She just stood there silent like a storm gathering behind still clouds. Elena wasn't his real mother, that much was true. She never tried to erase his late mother's memory. But what Liam never understood was that being a stepmother didn't mean she loved less. It just meant she had to love harder, knowing it might never be returned. It started small, the kind of coldness people dismiss. Forgotten birthdays, one-word replies, an empty chair at family dinners. But the chill in that house wasn't from the air conditioner. It was from Liam's eyes. At 17, he was already skilled in the art of exclusion. And Elena, she became his favorite ghost. "But you've seen it, haven't you?" That silent competition between memory and presence. The way a child can wield grief like a sword, carving out space for someone gone while pushing away the living. It's subtle, cruel, and sharp. To outsiders, Elena was the ideal second wife. Elegant but modest, educated but never condescending, she took care of Thomas, her husband, with quiet devotion. And Liam. She drove him to school every morning, even when he refused to say thank you. Packed his lunch with little notes, all of which ended up in the trash untouched. When he had the flu, she stayed by his side. He didn't speak to her once. They say stepmothers are either saints or villains. Elena was neither. She was just a woman trying to belong in a house that whispered constantly that she didn't. And Thomas, God, Thomas. He was no help. He loved Elena in that passive, weary way men sometimes do when they think affection is a favor rather than a fuel. He didn't notice the way Liam twisted the knife each time he called Elena by her first name. He brushed it off. "He's still grieving," he said. "Give him time." Time, as if that was the cure for venom. Years passed like slow-moving shadows. Liam grew taller, colder, smarter, too dangerously smart. He learned to wound with precision. He'd talk about his real mom in front of Elena as if to etch her absence into every surface of the house. Photographs of his mother remained on the mantel. Elena never asked to move them. She dusted them. That's the thing about the quiet mother. She doesn't need to claim the crown. She keeps the hearth burning even when no one thanks her for the warmth. But then came the whispers that Thomas was sick. Something slow, something quiet, just like Elena. The diagnosis was like a drop of ink in clear water, spreading through every corner of their lives. Liam came home from college less and less. Elena was the one at every appointment, the one keeping records, the one holding Thomas's hand when his legs shook. And still, Liam never said mom, not even once. Until the funeral. It was raining that day, of course it was. The sky wept harder than Liam ever had. The service was tasteful, restrained. Elena sat in the front row, a black veil covering the emotion she couldn't afford to show. Grief made people cruel. And funerals, they gave cruelty a stage. You know what they say about inheritance, that it reveals who people really are. And Liam, poor oblivious Liam, thought he knew how things would go. He stood tall, expectant, waiting for the lawyer to hand over what he believed was rightfully his. But grief has teeth, and so does a will. When the letter was read, silence swept the room like a slap. To my beloved wife Elena, everything. The house, the investments, the car, the lake cottage, the company shares. To Liam, a trust fund for education. No control, no property, nothing else. That's when it happened. The moment no one saw coming. The golden boy, the shadow son, the architect of disdain, he turned to her. His voice cracked. "Mom." And just like that, the room cracked open with ghosts and justice. She didn't flinch, didn't answer, didn't even look at him. Elena just folded her hands in her lap, the lawyer's words still echoing like thunder in the tense silence. Around them, relatives shifted uncomfortably, pretending not to notice the seismic moment that had just occurred, the boy who had never called her mom, now doing so with trembling lips and hungry eyes. But when someone only calls you mom because the money's gone elsewhere, it doesn't warm you, it chills. Liam's voice came again, softer this time. "Elena, I didn't know he—" She turned to him finally, and her gaze was not cruel. No cruelty would have been easier to fight. Her eyes were calm, ocean deep, the kind of calm that comes after the storm when the wreckage is all that remains, that quiet, final kind of power. "I know," she said simply. "You never asked." There are moments in life that undo us, not because they're loud, but because they are true. And Liam felt it then, the invisible weight of all the years he had dismissed, all the times she had been the one to show up while he turned away. You could see it on his face, that horrible realization she had never fought for the title. But he had lost something far bigger than an inheritance. That night the house felt hollow. Thomas's presence gone, the legalities signed, the guests dispersed. Liam stayed hovering like a ghost at the edges, watching Elena move through the house as if nothing had changed, and yet everything had. He tried again the next morning. "I know you don't owe me anything," he said quietly in the kitchen, "but I just thought maybe we could start over." The teacup in her hand didn't tremble. Start over. "I was a kid. I didn't know what I was doing." "No," she said, not unkindly. "You did. You just didn't care." Do you feel it? That quiet kind of revenge? The kind that doesn't scream, doesn't throw plates or burn photographs? The kind that looks you in the eye and simply reflects you back? Because Elena, she had spent years learning the art of silence. How to let a boy push her out of rooms. How to stay behind while her husband made excuses for his son's contempt. She had loved quietly, faithfully waiting not for gratitude, but for peace. But even peace has its limits. Later that day, Liam tried to dispute the will. Of course he did. Of course he called the lawyer, citing emotional distress, manipulation, grief. But Thomas had been thorough. Every signature, every clause notarized and time-stamped, witnesses, video messages, he had made it airtight. And maybe that was the final betrayal Liam couldn't forgive. Not just that he didn't get the estate, but that his father had known him, had seen past the performance, past the charm, and left everything to the one person who never asked for a damn thing. You see, Thomas wasn't blind. He just stayed silent too long, like most men caught between the woman they love and the son they're afraid to confront. But in the end, he made his choice. And Elena, she didn't need to win. She just needed truth. Weeks passed. Liam stayed in the guest room, too proud to leave, too shattered to face the world. Every morning, he watched Elena tend the garden, water the orchids, make her tea, and never once did she gloat. Never once did she bring up the will or the house or the inheritance. Her silence was not weakness, now it was armor. That's the thing they never tell you about dignity. It's not loud, it's not triumphant, it's the slow, steady refusal to beg. One afternoon, she left a note on his door, just a sentence. "There is soup on the stove, if you want some." Not love, Mom, not even Elena. Just food. Just care. The same quiet offering she had given him for over a decade, unnoticed, unthanked. He cried that night, not because of the money, not because he lost, but because he finally saw what he had destroyed, the one person who had stayed when everyone else left. And still she was feeding him. Liam didn't leave. Not because he was forgiven, he wasn't. And not because she asked him to stay, she never did. But because something ancient inside him had cracked, and he didn't know how to exist outside that house without reassembling the pieces of himself he had so carefully scattered. It wasn't guilt that haunted him, it was shame. Guilt says I did something wrong. Shame says I am something wrong. And for the first time in his life, Liam realized he had confused grief for permission. Permission to be cruel, to withhold, to test the limits of someone else's humanity just because his own heart had broken. He began to help, in small, clumsy ways, took out the trash before she could, brought her tea without being asked, trimmed the hedges one morning hoping she'd notice. She did, but she didn't praise him. That wasn't her way anymore. She had retired from the performance of gratitude. And isn't that the most terrifying thing when someone stops needing your apology? When they move past you entirely like a river carving new banks, not out of anger, but indifference. One morning, Elena sat at the piano, a dusty thing unused since Thomas's diagnosis. She played softly, slowly, a piece from Debussy. Liam stood in the hallway listening, not daring to enter. The music was fragile like memory, and though it lasted only minutes, it echoed in him for days. He remembered a moment years ago. He must have been 13 when she offered to teach him a song. He had laughed, called her a fake, stormed out. Now he just stood there, the notes wrapping around his ribs like vines. Regret is funny like that. It shows up uninvited and builds a home in your chest. That night over dinner, he asked her something strange. "Why didn't you ever leave?" She didn't look up from her bowl. "Leave? Yeah, me, Dad, this house, all of it." She put her spoon down. There was no anger in her voice, only bone-deep truth. "Because love to me isn't something you offer only when it's returned. And because I loved your father enough to stay, even when it hurt." "And me?" he asked. "Did you love me?" Her eyes met his, no softness, no performance. "I tried, every day, until I couldn't." You can't argue with that kind of honesty. It doesn't invite debate. It settles like dust on your skin. He began to spend his evenings in the attic going through boxes, old photo albums, letters, journals, pieces of his childhood he'd ignored while building altars to someone no longer there. And he found them the notes Elena had once slipped into his lunchbox, folded carefully. Little messages. Hope today is kind to you. You are enough. I'll always be here if you need me. He stared at them like a man reading a foreign language for the first time. The words hadn't changed. He had. Downstairs, Elena was preparing for the Foundation Gala, an event in Thomas's honor. She wore a black satin dress, understated elegant. Not for show, but for memory. Her hair pinned back like she used to wear it in the early years. Her wedding ring still on. Liam stood at the foot of the stairs watching her. You look beautiful, he said. She nodded distant. Thank you. Can I come with you? You'll need a suit. I'll find one. And he did. They arrived separately, sat apart. But people noticed. The way he watched her from across the room, the way she carried herself like a woman who knew exactly who she was, with or without applause. They spoke about Thomas, shared stories. The crowd clapped. Donations flowed. But in the quiet moment afterward in the car ride home, Liam turned to her. Do you hate me? She didn't answer, just looked out the window. No, she said finally. I'm just done needing you to love me. And that was the breaking point. Not the will, not the money, not even her silence. It was her freedom, because you can spend years trying to earn someone's love, or decades proving they don't deserve yours. But when someone finally stops needing you, that's when the power shifts. Liam didn't sleep that night. He walked the halls of the house like a ghost, retracing its old life, running his fingers along the stair rail she used to polish, staring at the bookshelf where his real mother's photo still sat untouched, a shrine built from absence. But even that image, once the center of his grief, felt smaller now. Not because his mother mattered less, but because he'd finally begun to see that love doesn't live in what's lost, it lives in what stays. And Elena had stayed, until she didn't have to. He found himself in the kitchen just past midnight, barefoot, staring at the pot of cold soup still on the stove, a remnant of her offering. He heated it slowly, then ate in silence. It wasn't the soup that filled him. It was the ache of realizing how many dinners he'd refused, how many kindnesses he'd trashed because he couldn't bear to accept love from someone new. The next morning she was packing. Not a dramatic exit. No tears, no slammed doors, just quiet suitcases and methodical movement. She wasn't leaving the house, not yet, but she was booking a month-long trip to Italy, alone. I think I deserve a view of the Amalfi Coast, she said, zipping her bag without looking at him. When will you be back? When I feel like it. He stood there stiff with panic disguised as pride. So that's it. You're just leaving. She paused, hand on her scarf. I spent 15 years learning how to stay. Now I'm learning how to go. There was no heat in her voice, no venom, just a woman reclaiming her time. You see, that's the thing about the women who stay too long. When they finally leave, they don't look back. They don't announce it. They just go. And the silence they leave behind is louder than any door slam could ever be. She was gone by noon. For the first time in years, the house felt like his, but not in the way he had dreamed. It was cavernous now. Grief had been replaced by guilt. Not the loud, dramatic kind, but the creeping guilt that drips like a leak in the ceiling, eroding everything beneath it. He wandered through rooms she had once tended with invisible care. The fresh flowers that used to appear by the window were gone. The soft scent of sandalwood and tea vanished. The order, the warmth, the subtle hum of being held in something maternal, even without the word mom, all of it hollow now. She didn't text, didn't call. He saw her photos on social media, smiling on a boat in Capri, eating gelato in Rome, standing near ruins that had lasted longer than any marriage. And in every photo, she looked like someone who wasn't trying to prove anything, just being. He wrote her once a long, rambling email, told her everything he'd been too proud to say, apologized not just for the name he never gave her mom, but for the 1,000 small ways he had chipped away at her, told her he remembered the way she cried quietly when she thought no one was listening, the way she never raised her voice, the way she made the house livable even when he made it a battleground. He hit send. She never replied, but when she returned weeks later, her skin tanned, her smile unbothered. There was a small box left on his desk. No note. Inside a photo printed not digital. It was of him, maybe age 11, sitting on a bench, Elena beside him. Her hand on his back. He was scowling. She was smiling. the caption scribbled in her handwriting on the back. I was still proud of you that day. No demand for forgiveness, no plea for reconciliation. Just a mirror, a reminder of who he had been and who she had always chosen to be. Liam wept. Not the performative, shallow sobs of someone seeking absolution, but the kind that rises from the marrow. The grief of finally seeing someone too late. And yet she had left him the photo. A breadcrumb, a trace, not an invitation but a choice. Because some mothers are born, others are built, but the rarest kind. The ones forged through fire, silence, and years of unreturned love. They don't need to be called mom. They are. The seasons changed. Autumn rolled in, brushing the house with its burnt ochre melancholy, the same palette that once colored Elena's scarves, the ones she wore while tending the garden with practiced grace. Liam stayed. He didn't know why. Maybe because she hadn't asked him to leave. Maybe because he still hadn't forgiven himself. Or maybe because a man doesn't abandon the place where he finally met his truth. Elena returned to the house, but not to him. She moved with new rhythms now. Dined alone, drove herself to events, made travel plans without discussion. She was still kind, never cruel, but the warmth was tempered, as if she had put her love in a locked box somewhere far out of reach, and only she knew where it was buried. Liam tried in every way he knew, fixing the broken banister she'd ignored, restocking her favorite tea, leaving her small handwritten notes just as she once had on the counter. Hope your day is soft. Thank you for staying even when I didn't. She didn't throw them out, but she didn't respond either. Some wounds don't need time, they need distance. And some silences aren't empty, they're boundaries. He started therapy. At first, just to say he had. Then, because the words he'd buried for years began to rise ugly, honest, hungry. He talked about his mother, the pedestal, the perfection, the fear that loving Elena meant disloyalty to the dead, the guilt of forgetting a face he could barely remember, the rage, the loss, and slowly shame gave way to insight to humility. He stopped calling her mom, not because he didn't want to, but because he no longer needed her to validate him with that role. He started addressing her by her name again, not with distance, but with reverence. She noticed. One evening she invited him to dinner. Her food, his favorite roasted rosemary chicken, garlic potatoes, and lemon tarts she used to bake when he was sick. He nearly cried when he saw the table. Why now? He asked. She looked up, calm as ever. Because this is the first time you've shown up as someone I might want to love. He swallowed hard. Do I still have a chance? Not to be your son? I know I gave that away, but to be someone you trust. There it was not a request for forgiveness, a request for connection. She didn't answer right away, took a slow sip of wine, studied him like a woman who'd seen the ruins of a man's pride and was deciding whether the land was worth rebuilding. I don't know yet, she said, but tonight we eat. They didn't talk much during dinner, but the silence wasn't cold anymore. It was full like soil after the rain, ready maybe for something to grow. Later, as she washed the dishes and he dried them beside her, Liam glanced at her hands. Strong hands. Hands that had buried a husband, raised a resentful stepson, and still found the grace to make dinner. I used to think love was a transaction, he said. Give me what I want and I'll call you what you need. But now I think maybe love is just staying, quietly, without needing to be seen. She looked at him then, and for the first time in a long time, her eyes softened. Then maybe you're starting to understand. They stood like that, two people who had been enemies by circumstance, connected by grief, and now tethered by a tentative thread of truth. The next morning Liam packed, not in anger, not in shame, just a man knowing when it's time to step out of someone's sanctuary and build his own. He left her a letter. It was only one page written in clean cursive, folded neatly on her pillow. Elena, I don't expect anything. Not a reply, not a second chance, not even a memory. But if you ever wonder if it was worth it loving me, staying when I pushed you away, teaching me what a mother could be, I want you to know it was. Because you didn't just love a boy. You taught a man how to love. And that man will spend the rest of his life making sure he never forgets. No signature, no expectation. Just closure, earned not granted. Elena stood in the doorway of his now empty room, holding the letter. Her lips parted, not a smile, not a frown, just the breath of someone finally released from the weight of what she carried for too long. And as she folded the paper, placed it gently in her drawer, and walked down the hall, it was clear. The woman who knows her worth doesn't beg, she watches. Then she rises.